Welcome to Nicolas meomeo. You are listening to our latest audio story. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. Sit back, relax, and wish you all a wonderful time listening. On the day of my blind date, I was in a terrible mood for a very simple reason. I had just dumped my scumbag ex-boyfriend, Luke Jimin, after catching him cheating on me with his green tea little sister before I could even celebrate escaping that blind relationship. My mother issued an ultimatum, forcing me to go on a blind date with a super rich wealthy bachelor who had a somewhat eccentric personality. She told me that heartbreak wasn't scary poverty was, and that if the date succeeded, using my husband's money to support 10 younger men would be much more satisfying. Her logic was spot on, but Lam Soha, was definitely not someone who could be bought easily unless the price was right. So today, I decided to dress up and prepare. A grand self-sabotage seemed to anger the other party and force the blind date to be cancelled. I walked into a high-end Western restaurant, my head spinning from last night's lack of sleep. Squinting at the room number on my card, 880, I arrived at the door, took a deep breath, and kicked it open. Inside the spacious VIP room, a man wearing a custom-tailored black suit was sitting on a single sofa with his back turned to me. His straight back and broad shoulders radiated a cold aura so intense that the room's air conditioning felt several degrees colder. I didn't care who he was. I immediately turned on my crazy, spoiled girl mode, slammed my hand on the table pointed at the back of his neck, and scolded him relentlessly, asking if he thought having a bit of dirty money meant he could buy me. I told him I'd rather raise a dog than marry a psychopath like him. Feeling that wasn't dramatic enough, I pulled a stack of small bills out of my handbag, the result of exchanging money at a convenience store that morning, and threw them onto the table. The bills scattered like rain as I told him to take the $50 to get his brain checked and get out of my life. The room fell dead silent. The man on the sofa slowly stood up, turned around, and took off his sunglasses. My heart skipped a beat. He was insanely handsome, with sharp, carved features and deep, dark eyes that carried an intimidating presence. But wait, why did his face look so familiar? Just then, instead of getting angry or minding my rudeness, he casually reached down, picked up a $5 bill from the table with his long fingers, and curled his lips into a mysterious smile. He told me in a deep, magnetic voice that while his nephew was indeed useless, how about becoming his young aunt instead? His words struck me like a bolt from the blue. His nephew. I stared at his face, and my brain went into overdrive. Oh no, wasn't he Luke then, to the legendary young uncle of the Luke family, the man who controlled the entire city's economy, and the very ancestor my ex-boyfriend feared more than a ghost? I looked at the room number again, 808. I had walked into room 880 instead of 808. I had just pointed at the nose of the most powerful tycoon in the city, called him insane, and given him $50 to check his brain. My legs turned to jelly. Stuttering, I backed away, but my high heel caught on the carpet, making me lose my balance. Instead of a faceplant, I tumbled straight into Luke then. Gia's arms, the faint scent of argarwood rushed into my nose, and I instinctively hugged his waist like a koala clinging to a tree. Only one thought ran through my mind. I was finished. Would he murder me to keep me quiet and bury me in the concrete foundation of his company? Luke Benja didn't push me away. His firm arms caught my waist precisely, and his eyes looked down at me with clear amusement, teasing me for being so timid now after scolding him so fiercely earlier. He chuckled, his chest vibrating. I quickly released him, stood up straight like a soldier, and offered a rigid, flattering smile, pleading that it was all a misunderstanding and asking him to let me leave. I turned to run, but a warm hand clamped around my wrist and pulled me back. Luke then casually walked to his desk, picked up 2 items, and held them out in front of me. a thick marriage contract, and a brand new household registration book. Bending down close to my ear, he asked in an irresistible voice that since I preferred raising a dog to marrying his nephew, what about marrying his youngest uncle instead? My mouth fell open. Before I could react, he raised his wrist to look at his limited edition watch, noting that it was 4 p.m. and the Civil Affairs Bureau closed at 5 p.m. I stared, suspecting my ears were tricking me or that the CEO had worked too hard and snapped a neural wire. When he calmly repeated that we were getting married, I immediately hugged my bag, jumped back 3 steps, and asked if he was trying to scam me to sell my kidneys, wondering how a nobody like me could dare to marry into the Luke family. Instead of getting angry, his smile deepened. Stepping forward, his tall frame blocking the light above me, he laid out 3 points. First, his family wasn't poor enough to need my kidneys. Second, his elders were nagging him to marry, and he needed an independent, wild wife to deal with troublesome relatives. And most importantly, his useless nephew needed a lesson, and he wanted someone to help him discipline him, I gasped. Just to beat up his nephew, he was willing to marry the guy's ex-girlfriend. How savage was this family's tradition? But wait, if I became Luke Jamin's young aunt, wouldn't I get to step on his head and slap his face every single day? Just imagining him bowing and calling me young aunt made every cell in my body surge with excitement. Seeing the shift in my eyes, Luke then delivered the final blow, a 3-year marriage contract, where I could spend freely on living expenses and shopping, take any villa or luxury car I wanted, and upon divorce, receive a high-end downtown apartment plus a check large enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Self-respect vanished instantly before the power of money and the chance for revenge. Patting my chest firmly, I declared that I would go anywhere with him, urging us to leave immediately so as not to keep the staff waiting. 20 minutes later, holding the bright red marriage certificate, my head was still spinning. I had escaped singlehead and jumped straight to becoming my ex's superior. As we stepped out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, a long, slender hand reached out and dropped 3 items into my palm: an unlimited black card, a key ring to a luxury penthouse, and a key to the latest Ferrari model. Luke then just slipped a hand into his trouser pocket and casually mentioned that the card's password was my birthday, reminding me that as the young aunt of the Luke family, I shouldn't let anyone look down on me. Staring at the 3 items, my pride and shyness vanished completely. I stashed everything into my bag, smoothed my dress, and offered a sweet 5-star VIP smile, asking if my husband was tired or thirsty and offering to buy him boba tea with his black card. Luke then paused, his surprise turning into amusement. He reached out, patted my head like pampering a greedy little cat, and agreed, though he lowered his head and whispered warmly that before calling him husband, I should try calling him young uncle first. Without hesitation, I blinked my eyes and called him young uncle, or rather, husband. With an unlimited black card, I would have called him my ancestor if he wanted. He laughed heartily, opened the door to his Maybach, and invited me into the passenger seat, saying there was a big stage waiting for me tonight. Settling into the plush leather seat, my phone vibrated with a text from Luke Jamin, ordering me to bring 2 cups of green tea to serve his little sister at his family banquet tonight to earn a chance at getting back together with him. A cold, vengeful smile crept onto my lips. I promised myself I would go not to serve tea, but to watch him kneel and bow to his new young aunt. At 7 p.m., wearing a haute couture gown worth as much as a luxury apartment and crystal-embellished heels, I walked into the Luke family banquet hall. Luke Thenjia's taste was impeccable, enhanced by luxury. I looked every bit like an authentic heiress. After being pulled away by board members to mingle, he instructed me to grab a bite at the buffet and ignore everyone else. Just as I picked up a piece of cake, a painfully familiar, annoying voice called out from behind, asking why I was there. I turned around to find Luke Jimin arm in arm with Tran and Nguyen, his green tea little sister. Jimin looked at me with a mix of shock and disdain, accusing me of sneaking into his family banquet and wearing a rented fake outfit that would get me kicked out by security. Tran and Nguyen put on a tearful act, begging me not to do this for Jimin anymore because feelings couldn't be forced. I swallowed my cake, nearly laughing out loud at their delusion. Swirling my champagne glass, I asked him where he got the confidence to think I was there for him. Enraged, Amin stepped forward, but Tran and Nguyen suddenly let go of his arm and stepped toward me, putting on a show of tripping and falling dramatically onto the floor. She clutched her ankle, crying and asking why I pushed her. Internally, I gave her a 10 out of 10 for her acting skills. Seeing his beauty in tears, Jimin raised his hand to slap me, demanding to teach me a lesson. I stepped back, ready to strike him with my high heel, when a large, firm hand reached from behind and grabbed his wrist. An intoxicatingly cold aura rushed over us as Luke Jimin's wrist was bent back, making him cry out in pain before recognizing his uncle. Luke Thenja, dressed in a black suit matching my dress, looked at his nephew as if he were trash, warning him that if he didn't need his hand, he could have someone chop it off. Jimin trembled in fear, repeatedly claiming it was a misunderstanding caused by me, his ex-girlfriend, sneaking in and pushing in Nguyen. Luke then just sneered, his voice calm yet heavy with authority, causing the entire hall to fall silent. He released Jimin, pulled me firmly by the waist against his chest, and pulled out a bright red marriage certificate from his suit pocket, placing it onto the banquet table. He introduced me to his nephew as the young aunt he would have to respect for the rest of his life. Lam So-ha, Jimin backed away, his face turning from green to pale white, then black like a malfunctioning traffic light. Stuttering, he asked if his uncle was joking. Luke then narrowed his eyes, asking if he had an issue with his taste in wives or if he needed to be stripped of his branch manager position before learning how to greet his elder. Terrified, Jimin's teeth chattered, and under his uncle's murderous gaze, he finally bowed 90 degrees, forcing out a humiliating greeting. Hello, young aunt, Tran. Nguyen, still on the floor, froze in utter shock. Overjoyed, I fought back my laughter, elegantly reached into my luxury bag, and pulled out a red envelope I had prepared earlier. Dropping it in front of Jimin, I told him in a maternal tone that, as his new aunt, I hadn't prepared much, but here was some spare change for him to buy a lollipop, reminding him to bow respectfully whenever he saw me in the future. Snickers erupted around the room. Mortified, Jimin dragged Tran and Nguyen and fled the hall. Watching them leave, I felt as radiant as the midday sun. At 10 p.m., as the party ended, I followed Luke Ninja to the underground parking lot. Just as we reached the car, he pinned me against the cool Maybach, trapping me between his arms. His overwhelming aura made it hard to breathe under the dim parking lights. Tilting his head down, his eyes locked onto my lips, and he smiled meaningfully, teasing me about how bold I had been earlier on stage and asking why my hands were shaking now. I swallowed hard, wondering what he was planning. Before his intimidating wall slam maneuver, my brain worked in overdrive. Reaching up to cover my mouth, I blinked innocently, reminding him that my dress was rented and that if he pressed too hard and tore it, deducting the cost from his black card would hurt his wallet. His dangerous aura instantly deflated at my overly pragmatic remark. Helplessly releasing me, he pinched my cheek and laughed, noting that I really knew how to ruin a mood. Breathing a sigh of relief, I proudly got into the car, thanking him for the compliment and suggesting we go home since I was hungry enough to eat a horse. Moving into his downtown villa, I expected a suffocating life walking on eggshells around a cold tyrant. Who could have guessed that the legendary overbearing CEO was actually a closet caregiver at home? On my first night, overly excited by the 3-meter-wide cloud-like bed, I binge-watched movies until 3 a.m. eating chips and drinking boba tea all over the living room. The next morning, gradually shuffling into the kitchen for water, I froze. Luke Thenja, dressed in a black silk shirt with rolled-up sleeves and a $1,000 gray apron, was skillfully flipping sunny-side-up eggs. Seeing my messy hair and dark eye circles, he frowned like a strict parent, asking what time I had gone to sleep and lecturing me about eating junk food late at night. Instinctively clasping my hands behind my back like a scolded student, I whimpered that I had only eaten a little, terrified that he would ban my snacks. Instead, he sighed, placed the plate of eggs and warm milk on the table, and gestured toward the massive double-door refrigerator. Curious, I opened it and nearly fell to my knees. It wasn't stocked with Kobe beef or expensive truffles, but packed to the brim with dozens of boxes of chips, jelly, beef jerky, and at least 50 cans of my favorite soda flavors, all premium imported versions. Astonished, I looked at him, keeping a straight face while sipping black coffee. He arrogantly claimed that the supermarket had a buy one get 10 free sale yesterday, and since he bought it for a dog he didn't own, I should eat it so it wouldn't go to waste. A buy one get 10 free sale at a luxury imported supermarket. Buying it for a dog, did he think I was stupid? Still looking at the mountain of snacks, I decided not to argue with his cinder nature. Wrapping my arms around his waist, I snuggled up to him, calling him the best husband in the world. For the next 2 days, I completely immersed myself in his material-spoiled affection until Friday afternoon, when an internationally embarrassing incident occurred. After waking up from a nap, my feet throbbed painfully from wearing 12 cm heels at the banquet. Groggy, I shuffled barefoot into his study. Seeing the door ajar, I pushed it open without knocking, whining loudly about how much my feet hurt from blisters and asking him to rub them for me. As I spoke, I comfortably climbed onto the leather sofa, stretched out my legs, and closed my eyes waiting to be served. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds passed in eerie silence. Feeling something was off, I opened one eye. Across the large desk, Luke then just sat pulled upright with a Bluetooth earpiece, his face frozen. Worse yet, behind him was a massive projector screen displaying a video call with at least a dozen suit-wearing, wise-looking foreign executives staring wide-eyed at me lying on the couch, demanding a foot rub. They were in the middle of a live, 100% broadcasted international board meeting. My smile instantly vanished, and blood rushed to my head. Panicking, I pulled my feet back and tried to crawl off the couch like a stealthy turtle, but his deep, commanding voice ordered me to stay. He removed his earpiece, stood up, and walked toward me. Bracing myself for a lecture about ruining the company's image, I was stunned when he lifted me up, sat me back properly on the sofa, and kneeled on the rug before the astonished board members. Placing my ankle on his thigh, he grabbed a lotion bottle, warmed it in his hands, and gently massaged my red heels with professional care, while I sat mouth agape. Luke then calmly faced the camera, switched to fluent London English, and nonchalantly apologized to his colleagues, explaining that his wife was being a bit spoiled and instructing them to continue with the Q3 financial report on screen. An elderly American director swallowed hard, wiped his brow, and awkwardly complimented him on being a wonderful husband while sending regards to Mrs. Luke, with other shareholders nodding in eager agreement. Blushing profusely, I stared at the powerful man patiently rubbing my feet. For the first time, my heart fluttered not because of money, but out of genuine affection. When the meeting ended half an hour later, I pulled my feet back in embarrassment and rushed to tidy up, but my skirt caught the corner of his desk, knocking a stack of documents onto the floor. Hurrying to pick them up, my eyes froze on an old, slightly faded photo that fell out of his black leather notebook. It was a candid shot of a hospital room at midnight 5 years ago, showing a girl in a blue volunteer uniform sleeping on a table beside a hospital bed. Despite being slightly blurry, the girl was undeniably me. The timestamp at the bottom read 5 years ago. I froze. 5 years ago. I had indeed volunteered at a hospital, caring for a VIP patient who was temporarily blinded in an accident for a month, though confidentiality rules meant I never learned his name, nor had he ever seen my face. Why did Luke then have this photo, looking up at him? I saw no fluster in his eyes, only deep affection and calculation. A wild, sweet thought flashed through my mind. Was that blind walk-in really an accident, or had he orchestrated the whole thing from the start, holding the photo? My heart pounded when I asked him where he got it and if he knew me before. He calmly retrieved the photo, tucked it back into his notebook, tapped my forehead, and teasingly remarked that overthinking would make me age faster, mischievously suggesting that if I wanted answers, I could join him in his bedroom tonight to go over every detail. A shiver ran through me, going to his bedroom to verify details. I wasn't stupid enough to walk into a trap like that. Stepping back, I announced I was going to sleep since I had work tomorrow, wishing him a good night. On Monday morning, I returned to Tin Fashion Design Company. Though I was now a billionaire's wife with an unlimited black card, I was an independent woman with ideal ambitions who still loved design and wanted to earn money through my own skills. But reality hit hard. Walking into the department meeting room, I found Tran Nguyen sitting at the head of the table. Unsurprisingly, my ex had used his connections to get her hired. There, seeing me, she raised her voice to announce that I was back, sarcastically adding that she thought I had quit the industry after hearing I was seeing an elderly rich man. As murmurs filled the room, I set my files down and coldly retorted that her eyesight must be failing if she called my husband old, noting he was only a few years older than her useless boyfriend, but surpassed him infinitely in handsome looks and character. Flushed with anger, Nguyen sneered and opened her laptop, telling me to see if I could still talk big after the presentations. 15 minutes later, department manager Lua Balding Boss, who always flattered Luke Jimin, entered to review the concepts. Nguyen volunteered to present first, projecting a mystical moonlight jewelry collection that drew unanimous praise. But I sat stunned. That was my design, an idea I worked on for 3 nights before breaking up with Jimin, which she had clearly stolen from his computer backup files. After receiving applause, she provocatively invited me to present. I stepped up, plugged in my USB, and projected my design, which was 99% identical to hers. The room exploded with accusations that I had stolen a newcomer's work. Nguyen immediately played the victim, bursting into tears and accusing me of stealing her hard work out of grudge over Jimin. Manager Lu slammed the table, berating me as the trash of the design industry, firing me on the spot, and threatening to sue me out of the industry. Watching their dramatic performance, I cracked my knuckles and sneered at the company's poor security. When Manager Liu yelled at me, I calmly connected my phone to the projector via Bluetooth. Asking Nguyen if she really spent a month drawing it, I zoomed in on a hidden signature in the diamond's pattern, a microscopic LS monogram representing Lam So-ha that was impossible to fake. Nguyen turned pale. Next, I pulled up the cloud's storage history showing the file was created 3 weeks ago, when she was still interviewing elsewhere, and finally played a dashcam audio recording from Jimin's car where she explicitly asked him for my design files to submit to her new company. A triple knockout blow. The room fell dead silent as everyone glared at Nguyen with utter contempt. Turning to Manager Liu, I asked who the real trash of the industry was now. Yet, instead of apologizing, he shamelessly slammed the table, declaring that since Jimin held a 30% stake in the company, whatever Nguyen claimed was hers belonged to her, threatening that no company in the city would hire me after he fired me. Nguyen wiped her tears and arrogantly mocked me for lacking a powerful backer. Just as I was about to roll up my sleeves and throw a chair at their thick-skinned faces, the glass door was violently kicked open. A lineup of black-suited bodyguards cleared the way, followed by 6 prestigious lawyers and Luke Thenja himself. Dressed in a custom gray suit, his aura was as cold as a blazer as he marched straight to the podium. When Manager Lou panicked and demanded security, Luke Benjia's assistant threw a thick dossier into his face, informing him that 10 minutes ago, the Luke Group had completed the 100% buyout of Tin Man Company, making them the sole authority to fire anyone. The entire room gasped. Ignoring the pair, Luke then just stepped up to me, his cold demeanor melting into gentle tenderness. Draping his suit jacket over my shoulders, he stroked my hair and softly announced in the quiet room that he had bought the company just for me to play around with, making everyone drop their jaws once again. Terrified, Manager Lou fell to his knees, begging for mercy. Luke then coldly ordered his termination and criminal prosecution for bribery and abuse of power, while directing his lawyers to sue Nguyen for copyright infringement and defamation, ensuring no design firm in the world would ever hire her again, as she was dragged out screaming by bodyguards like a bag of trash. Luke then announced to the remaining staff that I was now the new creative director and sole operator of the company. The room erupted into thunderous applause. Before I could process it, he scooped me up into a Princess Carrie. Blushing, I hid my face in his chest, asking him to put me down in front of everyone. He chuckled, asking why he shouldn't carry his lawful wife, and led me out to the car, promising to take me to a lobster lunch he had prepared. At the lobby, Luke Jamin rushed in trying to save his standing, only to freeze as he saw his ex-girlfriend whom he had abandoned wrapped in his uncle's arms like a priceless treasure, radiant and confident. The shock, humiliation, and intense regret in his eyes were undeniable, but I didn't even give him a second glance, nestling closer into Luke Benjia's embrace as we walked out. Over the next few days, my life transformed into a brilliant, luxury-filled dream. I went from a low-level worker to creative director, with former colleagues bowing respectfully from 10 meters away. On Friday afternoon, as I stepped out of the office building, a disheveled Luke Jamin suddenly blocked my path, begging me to hear him out and claiming he was tricked by Nguyen, swearing I was the only one he ever loved. Nauseated by his pathetic act, I threw my iced coffee right into his face, telling him he was far worse than cold-hearted trash and ordering him to get out of my sight, as he desperately followed me, trying to grab my arm. He unknowingly created a scene that looked like a struggle from afar. In a nearby black Maybach, Luke then watched the entire interaction through a rolling window, his dark eyes brimming with intense, icy jealousy that made the car's atmosphere freeze. That evening, when I unlocked the villa door, the house was pitch black. Calling out for him, I reached for the light switch, but a hot hand grabbed my wrist in the dark and pinned me against the cool kitchen wall. The strong scent of wine mingled with his signature agarwood fragrance overwhelmed my senses. Luke then trapped me within his arms, his eyes flashing dangerously in the dark. Reddened from alcohol, in a low, husky voice, he accused me of enjoying meeting my ex, reminiscing about the past, and regretting our marriage. Realizing he had been spying and misinterpreted the scene from a bad angle, I couldn't help but laugh, teasing him about breaking a giant jar of vinegar today. Squeezing my chin firmly, he demanded a serious answer. Seeing his mix of anger and hidden insecurity, my heart melted. Wrapping my arms around his neck, I tipped my toes and gave him a loud, firm kiss on the lips. Stunned, he went rigid as I smiled and called him silly, asking why I would ever leave a handsome, wealthy husband who rubbed my feet and cooked for me just to go back to a cheating nephew, reminding him that I had just thrown coffee in the guy's face. His cold expression shattered in an instant, looking at me like a predator finding its ultimate prize. He growled for me to say it again. Before I could finish calling him a silly young uncle, he captured my lips in a fierce, passionate kiss, lifting me onto the cool marble kitchen counter. That night, the kitchen curtains were drawn tight, and my 3-year contract was officially sealed as he claimed me completely. The next morning, while I lay in bed nursing a sore back and cursing his endless stamina, Luke then sat in His CEO chair looking radiant as spring, sipping his tea, he handed his assistant a transfer order sending Luke Jamin to a 3-year stint at a stone mining branch in Africa for disrespecting elders and harassing his young aunt, brushing off any potential family objections by threatening to send them along to dig rocks too. Before Jamin was escorted onto the plane, his mother organized a lavish charity auction to save face, sending me an invitation hinting that the star item of the night was a nephrite jade ring, the only keepsake left by my late mother, which Jamin had secretly kept after our breakup. Enraged by his shamelessness, I resolved to go reclaim it myself, especially since Luke then had to fly to Europe urgently for a financial crisis. Arriving alone at the VIP hall, I found Jamin and Nguyen surrounded by wealthy socialites. Nguyen proudly wore my mother's ring, mockingly asking if my husband had abandoned his contract toy now that he was in Europe. Min sneered, telling me to get ready to kneel and beg him for the ring. Standing tall, I coldly replied that even alone, I could easily crush the two of them and take back what belonged to my mother. When the bidding began at 500 million, I immediately raised my paddle to 1 billion. Jamin provocatively countered with 2 billion, then 5 billion, pushing the price higher knowing my personal account had limits. When I raised it to 10 billion, my secondary card's limit, he smugly shouted 20 billion, boasting and telling me to call him husband 3 times if I wanted to borrow the ring. Just as the auctioneer raised his gavel for the 3rd time, the roaring thunder of a helicopter engine shook the rooftop balcony. Black-suited bodyguards entered, led by none other than Luke Thinje. Straight off his flight from Europe, his powerful presence dominated the room as he walked straight to me, pulled me into his arms, and raised his hand to bid a staggering 200 billion under my name. The room erupted. A ring worth 1 billion was bumped to 200 billion just to slap his nephew's face. Jamin dropped his bidding paddle, his face turning ghostly white. Without a word to him, Luke then just signaled his bodyguards, who forcefully stripped the ring from Nguyen's finger and placed it respectfully into my hands. Turning to the crowd, Luke then firmly declared that I was his lawful wife and the sole legal heir to his entire personal fortune, warning that insulting me was equivalent to declaring war on the Luke group. Nguyen fainted on the spot, while Jamin fell to his knees, sobbing and bowing repeatedly to beg for forgiveness. Looking at the warm jade ring and the man who flew thousands of miles just to protect me, tears welled in my eyes. Gently wiping my tears, he whispered that since he was late and let me get bullied, I could punish him however I liked at home. Burying my head in his chest, I wept and laughed, telling him his punishment was to wash my feet for the rest of his life. Later that night, while he was showering, I opened his study safe to store the ring, using my birthday as the password. Inside, instead of gold or diamonds, I found his black leather diary and an old velvet box. Opening the diary, the first page from 5 years ago detailed his account of removing his eye bandages, finding my dropped student ID under the bed after I left, and vowing to find the volunteer girl who sang nursery rhymes out of tune and fed him porridge. Flipping through the pages, every entry was a record of candid photos of me over the past 5 years, my graduation, job interviews, and his silent endurance while watching me date his rebellious nephew. The final page, written on the night of our blind date, revealed that he had waited 5 years for me to dump his nephew and welcomed me into his trap, vowing never to let me escape. Tears streamed down my face, not out of sadness, but from overwhelming warmth. There was no accidental room, mix-up, or random marriage contract. His endless indulgence was a deeply affectionate scheme nurtured for 5 long years. As the bathroom door opened, Luke Thinje walked out with a towel around his waist, water dripping down his defined chest. Seeing me sitting on the floor with the open diary, he froze, a rare flash of embarrassment crossing his dark eyes like a child caught hiding candy. Kneeling beside me, he reached out to retrieve it, but I threw the book aside, threw my arms around his neck, and wept loudly, accusing him of being a liar who tricked me into a 3-year contract when he had been stalking me for 5 years. Catching me instinctively, his firm hands stroked my back as he softly admitted to being a fraud who used the slyest tricks to bind me to his life when I was most vulnerable. Red-eyed, he confessed how hard it was to watch me with his nephew, holding back only because he feared I would hate him as a tyrannical madman. Looking at his anxious expression, I whined, leaned in, and bit his shoulder. He gasped lightly, but didn't let go. Wiping my tears, I declared him the most successful scammer of the century, tore up the 3-year limit, and demanded he compensate me with his entire life, serving as his young aunt's devoted slave until he was 80. Luke then just froze for a second before letting out the most radiant, genuine smile I had ever seen. Whispering fire into my ear, he accepted the infinite contract and lifted me into his arms toward the bed to seal it once again. After that night, Luke then just completely shed his cold CEO facade, upgrading to an ultimate wife-doting husband. He snapped photos to report his day, kept a hidden camera on during meetings just to watch me work, and happily washed my feet every night without a hint of shame. When Jamin's mother Aunt Fuang Dao grew furious over her son's exile and teamed up with family elders to strip my status due to my humble background, she invited me to a hostile tea party at the main house while Luke Thenjo was stuck at a shareholder meeting. Hearing about it, he roared over the phone that he would lock down the main house, but I laughed, telling him to stay and make money while I handled women's internal affairs myself. Inside the tea room, Aunt Fuangde and 3 elderly aunts slammed their teacups, berating me for being a shameless gold digger. Calmly pulling up a sandalwood chair, I ignored their insults and pointed at their half-finished mahjong table, elegantly asking if family rules dictated that the winner at mahjong held the most authority. When the arrogance accepted my challenge, I unleashed my elite math and memory skills, pulling off an absolute slaughter, winning consecutive complex hands, sweeping their money, and using feng shui and spiritual tips to win over the other 3 ants. Within 30 minutes, they were eagerly pouring tea for me and praising me as a blessing to the family. Enraged, Aunt Fuang thou flipped the table, but was met with a sharp slap to the face from the family's matriarch Luke Thenjia's grandmother, who berated her for her son's foul behavior and declared me her favorite granddaughter-in-law, handing me the keys to the family treasury. Grandma smiled warmly. Suddenly, the strong aroma of cinnamon tea triggered an intense wave of nausea in my stomach, making me drop the money and rush to the sink to throw up. Grandma froze, then cheered like a teenage girl, ordering a family doctor immediately and declaring that I was experiencing morning sickness. Just then, the main doors burst open as Luke Thenjo rushed in with bodyguards to rescue me, only to find the elders fussing over me and warning him to step lightly so as not to disturb his unborn twins. Hearing the word twins, the fear tycoon stumbled, nearly tripping over the doorway with a comically bewildered expression, stammering to ask if I was okay. Hospital results confirmed I was carrying fraternal twins, 1 boy and 1 girl. The moment the ultrasound report was handed over, the man who once moved the city's economy broke down, his hands trembling as tears streamed down his face. Kneeling beside my bed, he buried his face against my waist, sobbing tears of gratitude. Rubbing his messy hair, I teased him for crying, reminding him that raising twins was expensive and would have to come from his personal account. Looking up with determination, he promised to transfer all his personal shares to me and our children, happily declaring he would work for me as a salaried employee from now on. 7 months later, a world-class luxury wedding took place on a private tropical island. Wearing a multi-million-dollar diamond dress that elegantly concealed my baby bump, I walked down a rose-covered aisle arm-in-arm with Luke Thenjie. Among the glamorous guests stood a hilarious sight, Luke Jamin, who had spent the last year digging rocks in Africa. Tan, dark, skinny, and muscular, he stood in a waiter's suit holding a tray of champagne, trembling under his uncle's presence as he loudly wished us 100 years of happiness and called his unborn cousins little ancestors. Laughing, I dropped a $50 tip onto his tray, playfully promising to promote him to team leader of the hauling crew within 2 years. Maimed by humiliation, he tearfully thanked his young aunt. Luke then pulled me close, jealous that I was looking at him for more than 3 seconds, tipping my toes. I kissed his lips before hundreds of cheering guests, promising that for the rest of my life, he was the only one I would ever look at. 3 years later at the main villa, our life with 2.5-year-old twins Luke Tuan, a cold little genius just like his dad, and Luke DM, a greedy little rascal like me, had turned into an endless comedy. At 10 p.m., Luke then walked into the bedroom in silk pajamas, hoping for a romantic night with his wife, only to find his spot taken by 2 chubby little dumplings. When he tried to lift his son to send him to the nursery, little Tuan opened his dark eyes, scratched his dad's hand, and firmly declared that he was sleeping with his pretty mom tonight, telling his old dad to go sleep on the sofa alone. Fuming, Luke then argued that I was his wife, but I woke up, pulled both kids into my arms, and warned him that if he kept arguing with the toddler, he'd be sleeping in the hallway with the dog. Instantly subdued, the most powerful tycoon in the business world pouted, squeezed onto the edge of the bed, wrapped his long arms around my waist from behind, and buried his head in my shoulder like a needy big sheep, complaining that he was now ranked 3rd in my heart. Turning around in the dark, I kissed his forehead, softly reassuring him that while the kids were my babies, he was my entire life source and my lifetime black card provider. Satisfied, Luke then smiled warmly, wrapping his arms securely around me and our children. As a gentle night breeze rustled the curtains, I rested my head on his broad shoulder, taking in his familiar Argarwood scent. I used to think walking into room 880 on that terrible blind date was the worst luck of my life, but now I realized it was fate's grandest winning ticket, leading me straight into the heart of the most deeply affectionate man in the world.